Thank you so much for this morning's talks. So I'm coming very much from the other side as an applied cryptographer. And for me, it's been very valuable to learn about perspectives of activists and attorneys. And I think the previous talk was a great segue into this one. So today I'm looking at cryptographic metaphors. So the visuals and the linguistic tools that we use to conceptualize cryptographic primitives and to communicate them to people outside the field, like attorneys, users, and even researchers and practitioners. So I shifted my slides around a little bit, following from the previous talk, to sort of keep to the theme of how law enforcement and policymakers understand cryptography, because cryptography and tech is always progressing faster than law enforcement can catch up. And the default way that law enforcement processes this new developments is to map it onto technologies that they already know. So this is what a metaphor is. It's taking a new concept and mapping it onto an old concept that is familiar. And that is why metaphors are still important, because they can influence how lawmakers decide to classify a new technology. So yeah, and the process of lawmaking is heavily based on rhetoric and metaphor. And it's not just in policymakers' understanding of it, it's also when they're presenting a case to a jury, for example, and arguing in court. A jury is supposed to reflect a commonsensical or logical understanding of the facts of the case. But what is commonsensical is what's familiar. And again, what's familiar is the metaphors that we know. So for example, I'm not sure who's familiar with this thing called Tornado Cash. It's a cryptocurrency mixer that anonymizes cryptocurrency transfers. And they were recently sanctioned by OFAC. And there's the, and then they presented this motion to dismiss. And then the DOJ replied with this, with this response to deny the motion to dismiss. And I was reading through it and I saw this that I highlighted here, a metal pan transferring energy to a juicy ribeye steak. And I did a double take because like, how is that relevant? So, okay, a big part of the indictment was them arguing that Tornado Cash is a money transmitter, that Tornado Cash, which is a set of like smart contracts as well as services, was actually transferring users' money. And the defense was trying to say that because we don't control the money, we are never in custody of it, you cannot say that we are transferring it. And so the DOJ responds like, would you say that a USB cable is transferring data? And would you say that a metal pan is transferring heat? Well, in the same way, Tornado Cash is transferring money. So that was, to me, a really not obvious metaphor at all. But you could see how, as a rhetorical device, it might sound familiar, it might sound intuitive to a jury or to a non-technical reader. So some other common metaphors that have been used to describe cryptography legally is as a container. So some kind of box or house or glove compartment that's containing a secret, that's containing a plain text. And this has sort of direct implications because whether because whether or not you can compel someone to reveal the key to a strong box is apparently slightly different to whether you can compel them to reveal the password to their computer, for example. Because in the first case, it's non-testimonial to hand over a key. But in the second case, because the password is stored in your head, then it is testimonial and it violates the Fifth Amendment. So again, the power of a metaphor. It can literally like decide whether or not your revelation is testimonial and protected by the Constitution. Another common metaphor for cryptography is that of speech or translation. So there's been some cryptographers who try to phrase encryption as a sort of expression, and then decryption as a sort of translation. And this is sort of an attempt to classify like under free speech laws. So I'm trying to argue that law enforcement officers cannot force you to translate something for them. So yeah, these are two examples of how a metaphor is not merely like a figure of speech. In the context of the law, it's literally a differentiating factor as to how you're sentenced, as to how as to which precedent applies. So yeah, that was my segue from the previous talk. I think yeah, it is true that technologists and attorneys have to collaborate and to share knowledge a lot more. And I think metaphors should not be overlooked here. And metaphors have like this ontological truth in the legal system. So how much time do I have left? Because
You have at least 10 minutes.
Yeah.
10 minutes.
But you can just,
have a few more,
yeah.
Okay. Because the rest of my talk is like a lot more fun or funny. And it's basically sort of looking at all the other ways that we use metaphors in cryptography. So yeah, besides communicating it to non-cryptographers, we also use it like internally to build intuition, to construct meaning. And so very often in sort of the basic intuition building phase, we use physical metaphors. So like visual metaphors like paint. This is a Diffie-Hellman key exchange being illustrated through the mixing of paint colors. So I just wanted to note that this sort of initial stage metaphor really doesn't go that far. So for example, for me, this introduction of, I don't know, 5 more paint colors just has like this like diminishing returns. So beyond a certain level of complexity, building intuition via metaphor is not useful anymore. And I work on zero knowledge proofs a lot. So once again, we commonly use these very physical, very game-based sort of metaphors to communicate just the intuition to a new audience. And these visual metaphors are, like I said, physical, they're skeuomorphic. That's what metaphors are. And when we enter into the realm of UX or HCI, they can actually really, really impact how users interact, how users understand your product. So this is a really great study about PGP5. And well, it was a very discouraging result because I think they said out of 12 people only 1/3 of them were able to correctly sign and encrypt an email message when given 90 minutes to do it. And 1/4 of them accidentally exposed the secret they were meant to protect. And so part of this paper was studying the visual metaphors that the interface presented to the user. So they found that, for example, the metaphor of locks might not have been the most intuitive because locks and keys, because every analog key is a symmetric key, right? And so people would have gotten confused that they have a encryption and a decryption key, and those are not the same key. And so similarly, this sort of representation of encrypting to a user instead of encrypting to a key sort of made people blur the distinction between different types of keys that a user can have. And so, but using the wrong format would just result in like gibberish. So a later study was sort of trying to refine the methodology of constructing these visual metaphors. So they said instead of trying to convey some kind of structural understanding of how the system works, metaphors should strive to cue some kind of functional behavior. So some kind of behavior that we're already used to. And they came up with a few examples here, like, for example, like a special language or different colors or owl. I'm not sure what that is about. But yeah, basically the power of the visual metaphor in communicating to the non-technical user is it can become a matter of safety. And the difference between good OPSEC and bad OPSEC is what kind of behavior you cue in the user. So also as a ex-physicist, I think the metaphor is powerful as a tool for making knowledge, for making meaning. So this is a Feynman diagram. It represents the interactions between particles. And you can see here that Frank Wilczek, the 2004 Nobel Prize winner, he said that his work would have been literally unthinkable without Feynman diagram. So having the right visual metaphor can unlock new levels of thinking and can unlock new constructions that were not possible before. So once again, really metaphors are like the realest thing there is. And I think that category theory people also have this very special relationship with diagrams, composing them, compiling to categories, the equivalences between diagrams. And so I think in cryptography, most sort of illustrations that I've seen so far are not anywhere near this stage. It's usually just Alice and Bob and then like arrows between them. And I wonder if we could do better. One sort of experience I've had is in writing arithmetic circuits for zero knowledge proofs. And this is a common representation of arithmetic circuits, so addition and multiplication gates and wires between them. But in my project, we actually sort of radically changed this to visualize it in a matrix. And so this sort of invokes a circuit board or a chip. And from this, we actually sort of came up with like chip optimization techniques that were just like optimizing the space that now it's like a 2D area. And this was also very useful for debugging because we could see like overlaps where we have like double assigned a cell somewhere. So, and this visualization became really popular just because yeah, it harkened back to something that was familiar to the chip design. So I do wonder if I do believe that there's lots more room to make meaningful use of visual metaphors in cryptography. Um, and I do believe a good visual can have very positive effects on security, and on understanding, on building intuition, and even constructing like new knowledge. So I'm kind of speed running a little bit now, but the final I wanted to give a shout out to the metaphors that we've encountered so far at Recap. So yeah, like Zoe yesterday was mentioning the purist versus pragmatic lens that led to very different conclusions on the security of the random oracle model. And I think Gabe mentioned yesterday that you know, an MPC circuit does not in and of itself guarantee non-disclosure. So this is an example of how a lot of cryptographic terms have very positive valence. They imply strong security, when actually in real world deployments is not that easy. Another good example is differential privacy, which sounds very nice already. But if you know, if the company is still using differentially private data to target you, then it's a net loss for user welfare still. Same for fully homomorphic encryption. I think people get really excited by how nice it sounds, and they forget that someone still needs to hold the encryption key, and it, you know, reduces the threshold encryption in terms of security guarantees anyway. And yeah, and Carmela also mentioned how data and trust minimization is not a good metaphor because it does not account for the sort of unintended uses that a program could have if its purpose is not properly limited. So yeah, more metaphors from yesterday about the adversary. So usually it's people empowered. Charlotte Lynn here says it's people empowered who get to define the metaphors. So, you know, in the identity case, this the issuers and the verifiers who they define, like the adversary is the holder. And so it's very important to problematize these metaphors that have become default, have become almost imperceptible, and yeah, to question them. So I think I will end off now. The rest of the stuff is just like kind of fun, frivolous, cultural, aesthetic, identity stuff. So yeah, metaphors are very useful in defining a sort of brand, a sort of image that like a tribe identity. And this is a good talk about privacy aesthetics. There's also like this project called Dark Fi. They are experts at memes and metaphors. They, I think, popularized the lunar punk metaphor as opposed to solar punk. Yeah, and so lastly, like metaphors can sort of be artistic, creative expression as well. So yeah, this is my final slide. But can you guys guess which cryptographic primitives are being illustrated here? Any guesses?
Bottom right is a Merkle tree.
Yes, the bottom right is the Merkle tree hash. Yes, nice.
Is the top left MPC in the head?
Yes, the top left is NPC in the head. Wow. How did you get that? Yes, the sponge function. Wow. Okay, how about the top right? I think that's the block cipher encryption. Okay, yeah, this is too easy. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.